And welcome back to another episode of 100 Ways to Make 100K. And on this episode, we take a bit of a side quest. And instead of doing $100,000, we switch gears and discuss 100,000 pounds of food. Now, I'm excited to introduce you to a CEO that's changing the world for Canadians across the country. Now, she's leading a company called Second Harvest. And last year alone, they rescued 74 million pounds of food. That's 74 million pounds of food rescued from a landfill and into the bellies of Canadians across the country. Now, she wasn't always this way. Through hearing her story, you'll learn more about the hustle required, the adaptability needed to take a company from one province to every province. Now, I can't wait to introduce you to none other than Lori Nikkel. So let's give her a moment to introduce herself.
I'm Lori Nikkel. I am the CEO of Second Harvest, and we're Canada's largest food rescue organization and a national charity that gets great, healthy food that would have otherwise gone to waste and gets it to people across Canada that are really struggling with food insecurity right now. I've been working in nonprofit my entire life mostly, and it came by organically because I was a low-income single parent at one point, and I had to feed my own kids. So that's how I started on this journey of food.
So how did you go from single parent to CEO of one of Canada's largest non-profitable organizations?
Well, I'm a hustler. So, when you're in a situation and you're a bit desperate, I also worked 5 jobs at one point to make sure that I could get food on the table and make sure I paid my rent. My husband left pretty abruptly at one point, and fortunately, I have a sister who lived in the States and took my kids for 6 weeks, and I was left in $10,000 of arrears in the rent that I was unaware of. Which, honestly, if there's one message I can tell all women, know your finances, own your finances. And so I sent my kids to my sister's and worked at a bar every hour I could. I slept on the floor of that bar and opened it and I closed it. But I also was volunteering at the kids' school and making a healthy meal for every child. And essentially that's what got me started. And that's why I'm successful today, because it was so entrepreneurial. Like, there was the need for kids to have food, but there was no money. The principal asked me to do it, but there was no money to do it. So I had to get staff, which basically is just recruiting a bunch of volunteers to do stuff for free, and fundraise because it was 350 kids every school day, a healthy meal. I had to understand public health rules. We had to make sure the kids were getting what they wanted as well. Like, you could give them food. If they weren't going to eat it, there was no point. You're on a budget. I would knock on many, many doors. We all would, and ask for free food from retail and restaurants, which is fascinating because one of the first places I went to was Loblaws in my neighborhood. They just opened one and they gave food to our school. I'm like, please give us some food. And now I look back, and our competition back then was Second Harvest. They're like, we're giving food to Second Harvest. And now I'm the CEO of Second Harvest. So that's kind of funny to me. It's kind of full circle moment.
So that program, what was that program? And how are you working full-time momming and full-time, what was this, a volunteer program? Or
Yeah,
was
this
this
was a volunteer program, and it was during the mornings of the school days where I'd have to actually go in and prepare the food. But then, you could do a lot of the stuff from home and, make the menus and whatnot. And I was also waitressing and bartending. And, I had to have babysitters, but I also have a really good sister.
Shout out your sister.
Shout out
So
to my sister, Debbie, who would take my kids a lot.
thanks so much, Debbie. You the bomb. So where did all of this hustle come from? Right? Like,
Necessity,
okay.
right? Necessity. I had to pay the rent. I had to feed my children. In Canada, we don't have a national school nutrition program. So this is all community grassroots work. And that's where I started. And it was Toronto Partners for Student Nutrition was an organization that saw what I was doing in my school and asked me if I would come work for them and show other parents how to do it. So what this really did, on top of like giving kids food, which was nice and wonderful, but what I actually saw it do was empower women. So the volunteers that we had, all of us, there was not one exception, was struggling with something. There was abuse. There was a lot of new Canadians that didn't speak the language, so they were learning. But there was a lot of struggle. And what all of the women didn't have was confidence. And by getting them together and getting out of this isolating space and building each other up and learning new skills or remembering we had skills, this confidence allowed all of us to believe in ourselves and go on to do really special things.
Why did that mean so much to you?
I don't even know that we realize that we lost ourselves. And that happens to women when we have children. You just, you become a mom and you lose your identity. And that's great because you want to be a good mom. But when you stop remembering who you are, you become smaller and smaller and smaller, and you lose your confidence, right? Like you just, like I was agoraphobic for a while. I have a very bad anxiety disorder because you just get smaller in your
Mm-hmm.
world. And this actually opened up all of our worlds into this wonderful place because you just forget, like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm awesome. But you forget you're awesome, right? Because you're
Yeah.
just busy doing
Yeah.
everything. So now I'm like, we're all awesome.
So when did that change? Because I know I've been in certain situations, I've felt a certain way before, and while I'm in the middle of the storm, like you don't even really realize that it's raining. Like you get so wet, you don't even realize that it's raining,
It's
you
a really
know?
good point.
And it's like, and then all of a sudden it stops, and you're like, oh shit, was it raining? You know?
Exactly.
Yeah. When did you realize that it stopped raining?
I don't know that you ever do. I don't know that I ever have.
Hmm.
And I think there's always going to be a hustle. There's
Yeah.
always got to be a hustle. Like, things don't happen. They happen because you're working hard at something, right? Like you're always thinking about it. You're always going that next step. So as soon as you stop and think it's not raining anymore,
Hmm.
I think that's worrisome.
So at a point, right, you're single mother. Necessity is kind of the thing that's motivating
Yep.
you and driving you. Now we get to this point where all of a sudden that's the need for security. I mean, like, it doesn't really ever go away, but like it kind of sometimes it feels like it might get to this point where it's like, okay, like I know where at least my next meal is coming from. Now I'm just worried about the one after that. When did that start
That's
changing
a
for you?
that's a really good point because it's you're right. I know where my next meal is coming from, but always in the back of my head, I'm one paycheck from being homeless. And that's not true at all. I have money in the bank. I'm fine. It doesn't matter. My brain doesn't function that way. I'm always a little bit scared of,
Hmm.
and then, I have children, so I'm always a little bit scared for them. I'm like, okay, but if they're not okay, then how am I going to help them? And they're fine. I raised great kids, man. They're adults. They're awesome. They're totally, they're living a great life, but it's always there because it's just the trauma you have your whole life. Like
Hmm.
I didn't have a great childhood either, so there's always trauma there that is pushing you.
Yeah. Now, do you remember? I mean, the show's called 100 Ways to Make 100K, right?
Yeah.
And most conversations are around personal finance.
Yeah.
But I've been challenging myself to explore and, open up different concepts and different discussions. And this whole 100K of impact is one that I want to dive into. But before we leave the personal a little, far in the past, but we're kind of going to keep that a thread throughout the whole
Sure, of
discussion.
course.
But do you remember the first time you made 100 grand in a year?
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago.
Really?
Really.
That's awesome. So
It,
dive in.
it wasn't that long ago.
Yeah. How did you?
We work in the nonprofit space,
Mm-hmm.
and the nonprofit space is often a very under-resourced space,
Mm-hmm.
and it's often looked as not a business. And I think I've come at it from a very different angle. We're a business.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing amazing things. All nonprofits are doing amazing things, and we're competing with actual businesses like for-profit capitalist business. But I want great staff, and if you want great staff, you pay great staff. And so we've changed it. We've flipped this on our head and said we want the best because we're doing really great work and we're making sure people get to eat, and we're working on climate emergency. So we need to pay people
Yeah,
properly
I think
to
it's a
get them.
pretty
Yeah,
important mission.
exactly.
That's
Exactly. But no, it really wasn't that long ago. Well, maybe it was now. 2013? Yeah, I guess it was 10 years ago.
Now,
No, maybe it wasn't. It was maybe 12 years ago.
so how did you get from, single motherhood, volunteering, to doing that and eventually becoming the CEO of Second Harvest? Like, how did you even get here?
Well, you've met me. I have a pretty big mouth, and and I have a lot to say, and for a good reason, right? Like I'm not a capitalist. I'm not in it for the money. I mean, that's the beauty. I think if you're working in nonprofit for the money, then probably don't, because it's really not the space. But it should be.
Mm-hmm.
But I started working in child nutrition, and I was quite good at it. And so Toronto Partners asked me to train people in Etobicoke, other moms, to do this kind of programming. And then I did that quite well. And so I worked for an organization called Food Share, which is a great food systems organization, but also very entrepreneurial, right? Like if you want to run a program, you got to find the money, you got to market it, you got to do all of it. And I think that's really important, right? Like you're not stuck in this box. And I think the more boxed you are, like the harder it is to become an entrepreneur of sorts.
Yeah.
So, and I did that very well, and I did it for 8 years, and then I was kind of bored. So someone offered me a job to scale nationally an organization called
Wow.
Breakfast Clubs of Canada,
Okay.
because they're very Quebec focused. And I'm like, I know people across the country. So we did that for a couple of years, and then I did another organization I scaled them, and I was like, oh my goodness, I miss my kids. I got to stop traveling so much. So I came to this organization called Second Harvest, which was this tiny organization, like what you see here today.
Yeah, it's just massive.
This is not the Second Harvest I walked into.
Okay.
It was this tiny organization in North York, lovely, focused on picking up rescued food and delivering it to some agencies in Toronto. It was quite small, and I liked the local feel. But I was like, wait, this is the one thing about being food insecure is I know the only way you're going to get food secure is by having money in your pocket to go buy food. Going to a food bank, going to a food charity is never going to make you food secure. Never, never. It's good. It's important. We want to make sure people eat, but there has to be big policy shifts to get people to have money in their pocket to go shopping. So I looked at it and I'm like, and everybody thought it was a little food bank. And I'm like, well, this is unique, right? Because we're making sure food doesn't go into landfill. We're not buying food. It's just redirecting good food. So this to me is not a food charity as much as it is an environmental charity, because there's an environmental imperative of keeping food out of landfill, right? It creates methane. It's a direct contributor to the climate crisis. So let's do that. And at the same time, of course, why would we not redirect that to charities and nonprofits?
Yeah.
And so what changed was the lens of this is what we are. Why be in this very busy space of food banking? There's lots of food banks doing great work. But I also went to a food bank once, and they were the nicest people. They were great. They gave my kids, Connor was with me, and they gave him this big bag of candy, and they were so lovely. It was one of the worst experiences of my life because I was just like, what happened to my life, right? Like they couldn't have been nicer, but still there's something inside of my head going, I don't want this to be my life. I don't want to be doing this. And so it pushed me in a different way, but I was still getting free food. It just wasn't through a food bank. It was through the child nutrition program. And it made me think, okay, who else is giving out food?
Yeah.
Outside of a food bank. So it's child nutrition. And then I'm like, oh, it's this shelter. It's this community center. It's this faith-based organization. And what changed for Second Harvest was I went, okay, so how much food is actually getting lost and wasted in Canada? Like, let's find the data. Only to find there was no data. Yeah. Nobody had done the research, which was fascinating, right? We always think somebody's done it, and nobody had, so we did it. And that kind of parachuted us into a different space of being taken seriously. Stats Canada is using our data. Yeah. Businesses are using our data. And then, we have a fleet, which is great, except for environmentally. We don't want a bunch of diesel trucks all the time. Yeah. But we know there's much more food, so how do we get it to people? And I'm like, oh, well, my background, actually, I did go to school for computer science. I dropped out, to be fair. And it's like, I'm not a coder. It's very rewarding work. And when you can get something to run when you code it, it's wow. But it's like very isolating work, and that's not me. But I'm like, we need an app. We need to connect people and organizations to food without our trucks. Yeah. And that also allowed us to scale across the country.
So how much of this was in place when you first got here?
Oh, nothing.
Versus what were what do you think the mentality around Second Harvest was, and the mindset and the belief about what Second Harvest was? Because you mentioned at first like they thought it was a food bank, but you're describing it now as what it is. But what was it when you first started working here? I kind of want to dive into like that pre-transition to CEO.
Yeah, when I walked in the door, it didn't fall under the food bank network because the food bank is a membership-based organization. Okay. And so there was already a food bank. So it wasn't allowed to be a food bank, basically, because Daily Bread exists, which was great. And North York Harvest existed. So I don't know why they weren't before, but they weren't when I started. So it was just this really small organization that was more food, like they were really focused on getting food to people. Yeah. So it was a great organization. It was very small. I think when I came, we were doing just under 7 million pounds of food for the year. Now we're at 6 million pounds a month. So, crazy. And it was just the mentality was very different. And they were small, and they liked being small, I think. They never really kind of saw, there wasn't a big vision for it. It was like, this is what we do, and we're good at it, so let's do it. We're really good at this logistics piece. Yeah. And so that's what I walked into.
And what was your role when you first got here?
I was the director of programs.
Okay. So kind of similar to like the previous experience when you were actually getting the food to people, creating some cool
Exactly.
programs that had impact.
Yeah.
Do you remember? I mean, like, data in small organizations is definitely nothing that's easy to come by. But do you remember the first time that you maybe fed 100,000 people in a year?
Oh, I don't. I'm
Okay,
so
okay.
sorry.
I
Like
mean, that's okay. I don't even know how many times I've fed myself, so I wouldn't expect you to have that data.
I don't. I do remember when I first came in here, and I was
Hmm.
because I come from child nutrition, and
Hmm.
our focus was very much healthy food.
Mm.
I walked into a warehouse that was full of coffee and water, and I'm like, oh, this isn't great. Like
Mm.
there was other food, but it was just not consistent, and so it
Yeah.
was really driving that. How do we get better food? How do we get better food? How do we
Mm.
get more perishable? How do we get because they were also perishable food, but there just wasn't very much,
Mm.
and so how many were serving? Like I know in 2017, and I started in 2014, it was about 6 million pounds, which equate to about 6 million meals.
Okay.
So basically 6 million people, one meal, but not
Crazy.
really, right? Because everybody's having a meal a day.
Yeah. I mean,
So
that's a pretty easy way to measure it. I mean, if you're looking at
yeah,
on the impact numbers. Okay. So 6 mil a year or 7 mil or so
yeah, right around
people.
there.
Now, you said now they're doing
But that
that.
was like if you gave them one meal
Yeah. Oh,
for the
yeah.
whole
But
year,
you need 3 meals a
you need 3
day.
meals a day. So do the
Wow.
math on that.
And how many provinces was that in
Oh, we were
at
in
the time?
Toronto,
Just Toronto.
just Toronto. Yeah.
Okay. So you took this thing global then.
Well, yeah, actually,
Or
we're
I guess
national, but
Canada
no, but
wide.
we
Sorry.
also do some international work, and we are
Okay.
global thought leaders on this.
Okay.
So, but we actually do support that. A lot of our food actually ended up in the Ukraine. Not a lot, but
Yeah.
some of our food ended up in the Ukraine to support some orphanages,
Mm.
and we also work with some other international organizations when we have surplus where we don't really know who to give it to because it's not as easy as here's some food. Like it has to match the charity that it's going to. So
Understood.
sometimes there is actual surplus of the surplus.
Understood. So now when did you end up getting elected CEO?
In 2018,
Why you?
because I'm just really good at what I do.
Yeah. Okay,
Um,
dust the dirt off your shoulders a little bit. My bad.
well, truthfully, it's because I did have a vision for the place,
Yeah.
and I was already in 2017. I actually was promoted to executive director of foodrescue.ca because it
Okay.
was me that got the funding for the research and the technology, and
Mm.
I was owning that technology and building it, and so hiring staff to manage the pieces. But that's why,
Wow.
because I think the board saw my vision as well.
Mhm.
And it's also Second Harvest, to be fair, has the best board of any charity I've ever worked with, worked around anybody. We have the best board ever.
What makes a board the best? I've never explored this topic or thought about it. I mean, I've been thinking about a show from boredom to boardroom,
Ooh, I
but
love that.
we'll see.
That's
Well,
good.
maybe that might be some foreshadowing for something. But what makes a board good in your opinion?
I think a board has to be passionate about the mission without getting involved in the day to day, right? You hire a CEO to do the job, and their job is governance. What's the risk? Where are we like? Let's make sure we're managing the risk. So, I mean, one of our board members says, and I love this phrase, it's fingers out, nose in. Like you can see it, but don't get so involved because, they have expertise in their areas. And also our board are all very senior people in whatever field they're in,
Okay.
which is awesome. But they all love what we do, right? And that they have to have a real desire to support this cause. And they're 100% supportive, right? So they're not just about having a meeting. They have very different skills. And so depending on what the need is of the organization, one will come in and say, okay, this is the skill and I can help you here. So for example, one of our board members was the chief investment officer for OMERS.
Okay.
And actually, I think he still is. I think he's retiring though. And we wanted to put in a pension, which is very rare. Like nonprofits do not have pensions.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, but we need one, right? Like, what happens to nonprofiters
when big organization?
But also, it's just unfair. Like many people that work in government have pensions. These other organizations have pensions. And what happens to nonprofits? They usually don't get paid the most, and then they turn 65 and nothing. What are they supposed to do?
Yeah, just volunteer at the nonprofit. And I was like, come on.
Yeah, how are you going to pay your bills, right?
Yeah.
Like people that work in nonprofits shouldn't be using the services of a nonprofit. The end. Like if you're working in a food charity, you shouldn't have to access a food charity. That's just wrong. And that has happened in our system. So it was like, hey, Satish, we need a pension. What do you think? And he's like, of course we need a pension. So just, getting us through that. Like, how do we get it? Who are the right people to talk to? And just implementing that. So now Second Harvest has a pension. So when we have board members like that will, for whatever it is, if there's a marketing issue or marketing support, we just rebrand it and, we want your opinion on this. Does this make sense? Because, that's not necessarily our strongest skill set, a lot of it. So we built this beautiful building.
Yeah. And you got a cool light behind you, which I think is
Right?
like puts the icing on the cake.
It's a very cool, that's been one of our events.
Yeah.
But even this building was, okay, who has a construction background? Like, how do we even know? And we had a great person on our capital campaign committee who knew somebody on the board of Sobeys, and they came in and were like, okay, this is how you got to do it, and saved us so much money.
That's awesome.
Saved us so much because we're a charity. Like, what do we know?
Yeah.
We'll do our best. But that's what a good board does, is they bring in their skills and then they go, okay, call me when you need me again.
Did you ever think that you'd be going from working like nonstop in a bar, having your sister babysit your kids, to now you're implementing pensions for an organization that you're spearheading?
Wild, eh?
Isn't that crazy?
It really is.
Yeah.
No.
Right?
I was worrying about my own pension because who else doesn't have pensions? Waitresses and bartenders.
Not at all.
At all.
Yeah.
Right? So I just feel strongly that people, after they turn 65, people shouldn't have to work until they die.
Yeah.
It seems so wrong in our culture that's expected now, and that you're 75 years old. Like, peace, man. If you want to work when you're 75, I probably will.
Yeah.
I don't want to feel like I have to.
100%. Now, do you still feel like you have to work, or are you fueled by something else? Yeah, I hear you. I mean,
of course I have to work.
Like, inflation just got crazy, right? Like, let's be real here.
Yeah.
Now, so let's go back a couple steps here.
I'm not
so
quite that old. I can retire.
What are you, 33, 34? You had your kids when you were like 3, right?
I was 21.
Yeah. So they're doing 7 million a year, pounds of food delivered on an annual basis. You have a vision for the organization as you were working there, before you were working there?
As I'm here, like, I just start seeing
stuff.
You start seeing it.
Start getting
and
excited.
It starts growing, right? And this is not just a Lori Nikkel thing.
Yeah.
We have the best team. So as soon as we did the technology, we hired this guy, Winston, who is our vice president of food rescue. So he manages like everything, food procurement, our fleet and warehouse. Like, he gets food. We get emergency calls for like a climate crisis, and we need food in the furthest north. What does that
look like? So a lot of people can't like witness, like they can't experience this stuff, right? They're taking the GO train from, let's say, Durham or wherever, or the West End or Peel, or they're going downtown to work every day, and they're just miserable because they got to go to the grocery store and sit in traffic, and then go take their kids to soccer, and then hopefully they have enough time, or they just go to a drive-thru, right? And they're like, oh, dang, I got to do it all over again. But then you mentioned something like a food crisis. And like, I don't even know what that would look like. You know what I mean? Like, what is that? What does that mean?
What I'm speaking about really is the climate crisis.
Okay.
And so the climate emergency and how it's impacting food. So the fires in the north, I mean, there's fires everywhere.
Yeah.
The climate crisis is real, and we're feeling it. So in the north, there are people in Northwest Territories that were displaced, right? And so it was really hard to get food up to them. And they were living outside of the capital, and they live in communities.
Yeah.
And we got a call from the government saying, can you get some food up here?
Wow.
And Winston is like, yep, we can.
Huh.
And so, we contact some of our supporters and say, okay, what do you have? What do you have? Burn Brave eggs, and Loblaws stepped up right away.
Wow.
But it's not simple, right? Like, it's getting it to, you can't have your water anymore. My dog just drank your water. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Okay.
This is so funny. Oh my goodness.
I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay.
I'm
Okay.
so sorry. She was thirsty.
She's thirsty. There you go. The water's for someone, right? That's all that matters. So you get it up there. And so how do you even build like a network that can go and be that responsive?
Exactly.
Because at the time you said they're only in Toronto.
Yes.
So hold on. Before we get too far in advance, and you'd be like, well, I just called this partner and this partner and this partner.
That's life. It's all partners, right? Like, it's all getting to know lots and lots of people.
Okay.
And I think COVID actually was what scaled us so quickly. So we had a plan to scale,
Mm.
and then COVID happened, and we're like, oh my gosh, we have to get food out across this country quickly.
Mhm.
We were also one of the partners with the government of Canada on funding the emergency
Okay.
food security funding.
Okay.
So we were allocating grants, we were allocating food, and so scaling really was a necessity because
Yeah.
of COVID.
Yeah. How did you make this stuff happen? Because like if they're only in Toronto, like when did it start becoming nationwide?
Well, we started in 2019. We
Okay.
just were scaling across Ontario.
Yeah.
And so we had some pilot cities, I think 4 of
So
them.
what was this? This was right after the food rescue research?
This was,
Like,
right. It's all happening around the same
Same
time. We're
time.
doing like the research has come out. So that's
Okay.
been published. And now the app is ready to use.
okay.
And then the Ontario government gave us some money to pilot it in different communities in Ontario, the
Okay.
app.
Okay.
And so we know we have good partners already.
Mm-hmm.
Some, like now we have so many. It's like amazing food
Yeah,
partners.
yeah.
But just to see like how would this work? Do you need a person there? Do you just need to market the idea? Like how do you
Mhm.
get, even though it's a great idea, like people still have to buy in,
Yeah,
right? And so,
yeah.
and it's also a tool. So people have to learn to use it.
Mm-hmm.
And so things are not that easy.
Yeah. It takes time. It takes reminders. It takes,
So
hey, did you do this?
But we were lucky because we had that time,
Mm-hmm.
and then COVID happened. So we're like,
Mhm.
okay, I think we know.
Yeah.
But then it was like building out a team across the country in the moment. It's flying the airplane as you're building it. That's
yeah.
exactly what's happening. The whole
Wow.
time.
That's insane. So where was the first place that you kind of expanded to? Was it after fires? Is that the
The first place we expanded to was British Columbia.
Okay.
Um,
It was this was out of necessity, right?
this was the second. The first was Ontario.
Okay.
Then we went to BC,
Okay.
and then COVID, and then it was just everywhere all at once.
Okay. So it sounds like BC kind of worked. Or
Oh, we were just just
Yeah.
started,
Yeah.
and it's working. But no, we had just started. I think we'd just done the announcement
Mm.
maybe a couple months before, and then like boom. Because I had worked nationally in the past,
Yeah.
I actually knew people to call and say, okay, can you come work for us? Can you come work for us?
The power of relationships, isn't that crazy?
That's all it is.
And you never know when you're going to need to call someone. And it's usually if you've done something with them in the past, it makes it way easier in the future
Yes.
to get through 19 layers of admins and securities and pushbacks, et cetera, et cetera. That's insane.
Yeah.
Now, how much food per year roughly are you guys doing at this time, 2019 or so?
So we're scaling like a little bit by little bit.
Okay.
I think $30 million worth of food in
Okay.
2017.
Okay.
It's around 10, let's say it's around 10 million pounds. And then I remember as we went up to like 12 point something, and it was 15, and
Yeah. What?
then boom.
Yeah, so let's dive into the boom,
Yeah.
like that curve in the hockey stick, it's growing now, things are going
Yeah.
crazy. What changed?
Honestly, it was the app and COVID.
Okay.
So
So I just need to make an app and COVID needs to happen, and next thing you
basically,
know, I'm going to boom,
I think that it would have grown anyway. So, the instigator was having the app.
Okay.
Having amazing staff, because it's growing now and COVID's over.
Mhm.
And it grew last year from 55 million pounds, and this year we're at 78 million pounds. So like that's a ridiculous growth, and COVID's over. So that actually has everything to do with having incredible staff members.
Shout out the team.
Oh my gosh, they're amazing. They're so amazing. Awesome partners.
Okay.
And being really good at what we do, right? Like integrity is one of our core values, and all that means is, you say you're going to do something, you do it. That's it. And we're unique that way. Like we're that one-stop shop where we say we're going to be somewhere, we're there. It doesn't matter what it is. We say we're going to do it, we're going to do it. And you think that everybody would do that, but that's not the case. And so the minute you don't do that, you lose a partner. And these are food businesses that are very busy, and they have a lot of stuff going on. We're an afterthought, right? Like their core business is to make money, and we're getting stuff for free.
Yeah.
So we have to be really, really on point all the time. And we are.
So what type of things what types of changes have shifted in the operations from, then till now?
The big one is, although we have a fleet and warehouse in Toronto, and we work in the GTA picking up food, and we have a tractor trailer, which is so cool.
That's awesome.
So cool to pick up big food. But it's really understanding what third-party logistics look like.
Okay.
And so having support across the country for cold storage, and being able to work really quickly with transportation providers. So Uber Freight's one of our providers. They called at the beginning of COVID because they wanted to, they had their cars, right? Like they have Uber drivers and like, how can we help? And I'm like, well, you can't unless you've got a truck.
Mm.
And they're like, funnily enough, we're just launching Uber Freight. So they didn't even exist.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
And I'm like, well, didn't we just have, like, everything to me happens for a reason. It really does. Like, there was just a kismet moment. I'm like, oh, well, fantastic. So then, to be fair, I step back and this amazing team of mine goes, okay, we got this. And they built out a third-party logistics program that is
Wow.
second to none.
So do you have the perfect picker or something like that? How do you find these right team members? I mean, you got a cool organization, so a lot of them probably come to you, but how do you know which pieces to put in place? How do you know which pieces to invent that weren't necessarily there before?
I think the truth is the amazing staff we have, a lot of them, I mean, some, well, you've met Sarah, she's great, happened during COVID, but they kind of grew with the organization. We were all in this together.
Yeah.
During just the intense, like, and it was intense COVID where we were not sleeping. We were working 24/7. I'm not kidding. Like, we were up all the time making sure we can get this happening. And so they've all been doing this. They've all been around for the ride. So their ideas are like better than mine most of the time. I'm like, yeah, sure, do it. Right. Like, let people do what they do best and stay away. So,
yeah. Nose in, hands off. Right.
Exactly.
That's really
exactly
cool.
Right.
So what type of data and information are you paying attention to in order to kind of, bend the sail so that it catches the wind in the right direction?
Well, also we have a data analytics team, which is very unique for a charity.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's really understanding where the food's coming from. So it goes back to research. So the second bit of research we did it's called Canada's Invisible Food Network.
Okay.
And it was about, I went to food bank once, but everybody says food bank, and that's great, and they're great, and we support them. We're like the food bank to the food banks, but then there's all these other charities. So let's find out where they are. And then we learned there's 61,000 charities giving out food in Canada. Wow. 61,000. Like,
and did anybody do this research before, or did you guys have to collect this?
We did.
Wow.
We did. Well, we hired, like, we hire an organization.
Listen, and so many people could do the work, but it takes the right mind to ask the question.
Exactly.
Right. So, and the quality of your life is dictated by the quality of the questions that you ask. And if you don't ask the right questions, you're not going to get the right information. If you don't get the right information, you can't make the right decision.
100%. Exactly.
So which question were you asking? What data was this? So
the
61,000.
data was, let's figure out where all the charities are. Like, who actually needs the help? And so now we have this data, and we're like, okay, there's about 4,700 food banks in the network. So wow. There's 61,000 charities. Like, okay, like, let's map them out.
Okay.
And then, so now we know where the charities are. Where's all the food? So that was the third of the trilogy of research.
That's a question that I'm asking like every night. Like, where's the food?
Where's the food? It's not in the fridge.
It's not.
It's very expensive at the grocery store right now.
No matter how many times I look in the fridge, it doesn't appear. I get pissed.
Or nothing that you want appears.
Nothing.
There's always, there might be food there. Yeah. This is not what you feel like.
Yeah. Okay, so you start asking, where's the food?
So where's the food? So then the next bit was wasted opportunities, what we called it, because what we learned was of all the food businesses across the country, and again, we mapped them out, and we asked the question, how many are actually giving food away to charities? And not just us, to any charity. And it was 4%. I'm like, oh my goodness, there's so much opportunity.
So much.
It's fantastic, right? Yeah. Like, so we're barely scratching the surface.
Yeah.
So that was really important, and that's the data you collect, right? To figure out what the problem is. It's always, what's the problem you're trying? What's the problem I'm trying to solve? Well, I'm trying to get food to people. Okay, where are the people? Like, they're not hard. Like, they're not. It's
basic questions.
They're basic. Yeah, I think people overthink.
Yeah.
And I'm an underthinker. I'm just like, most basic, simple. Yep.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer. So does somebody know the answer? And then I'm often shocked that nobody did the research.
Literally.
Right?
But I mean, nobody asked a question. How can you get the answer, right?
We talk about food waste in Canada, though. And you'd think somebody would.
You'd think somebody would, but they're too busy on the go train being frustrated at the things that they have to do, right?
Government, to be honest,
Yeah. I mean, but what is the government, right? It's just a bunch of people that have to take the train downtown that are pissed off too, right? So, hey, I didn't
think
say
that they're not all pissed off.
Not all. Okay. Maybe we'll take that part. Maybe we won't, but who knows? I like
to think that everybody on the GO train isn't always pissed off.
I hope not, but listen, I drove downtown the other day and I was like, what is happening here? Like, everybody seems so frustrated. People don't say hi to each other.
Yeah.
Everybody's...
But Toronto's an unfriendly city too.
You think so?
No, it is. Like, literally, I think there's science behind it. Or there's data behind that.
No,
we are
maybe I think we got a new research project on our hands right here.
No, I think that one exists. I really do. I think we are one of the unfriendliest cities.
That's crazy.
Mm.
So what types of things are you paying attention to these days? You know, what types of information is getting you going? What type of data and questions are top of mind for Lori and
So
Second Harvest?
right now, I mean, we have a problem in Canada. If we're wasting 58% of all the food produced for us, so that's what we learned, by the way. 58% of all the food produced for Canadians is lost or wasted, which is
I swear
outrageous.
most of it is from my little siblings. They're throwing out everything on their plate. It's insane.
I think it's bigger than them,
Okay,
but
probably.
but yes, it's good for everybody to know. That's really up for the supply chain.
Yeah.
And so we're not measuring it. So we did a research project, but we made a commitment to the UN in 2015 that Canada would cut our food waste by 50%. We're not measuring it. So how can you cut it by 2030 by 50% if you don't even know what it is?
Yeah.
So that's really something that I'm driving change on. I sit on Canada's Food Policy Advisory Council, and also best before dates. Best before dates do not mean bad after. And we have been taught this lie that you look at this date and the day after it's garbage. And so we're throwing it away, and we shouldn't be. It's nonsense. The dates are not, they're not government regulated. These are put on by manufacturers. You know, there are 5 foods in Canada that expire, 5. And so
only 5?
there are only 5 foods that expire in Canada.
Wow.
And welcome.
Wow. That's really interesting.
Yeah, the rest are best before dates. And so, you know, we have to put on best before dates for foods with the shelf life less than 90 days.
Okay.
But people always send me, because they know this is like a passion of mine, these best before date things. So there's this salt, and I'll show you the picture. It's salt. It says 250 million years old salt, and the best before date was 2 years ago. Come on. It's just nonsense.
And I wonder who put that date on there. And is it really bad? Yeah.
It's not bad. No, of course not. It's nonsense. It's just, you know, it moves product.
Yeah.
I want to move product.
Yeah. I mean, hey, everybody's got their objectives, right?
Sure. But I mean, it shouldn't be at the detriment of society and human beings and the climate. So
yeah. Yeah. Is it really right? Is it really best before that date? And like,
no, they know that it's not. I think everybody knows that it's not. It's an arbitrary date.
Huh.
It doesn't mean anything. It really doesn't mean anything.
Are there any other elements of life that you feel that we're just living by made up rules?
Oh, well, life is a social construct, all of it.
Ooh.
So
Talk to me. Dive into that for a second. I know this is outside of the Second Harvest, but like we're getting to know Lori, you know what I mean? And
I don't know. I think I'm actually repeating what my youngest son says to me all the time.
Okay.
Life is a social construct. I'm like, yeah, I guess technically it is.
Wow, your son sounds like a philosopher.
He's awesome. I love that kid. He's great.
Lori, thank you so much. This has been fantastic.
Yeah, I've had fun.
I'm really curious. If you were to walk into a bar and there's a bartender there that you know is opening and closing and it's been working for 6 weeks nonstop, you know, trying to get this rent that's in arrears, you know, caught up. They can't see past the next meal. You know, they're barely eating because they're like, fuck, I gotta pay this rent. You know what I mean? What do you think, you know, what do you think that conversation would go like?
I think the conversation would be, let me take this shift and you can have the money. And I know you're going to be fine because you're a hustler. Everything's going to work out. And how can I help? That's it. Like, I think people need to know that other people are there for them. And sometimes when you're in the middle of the rain, you forget that. Yeah. And that's it.
Do you think if you were still at that bar and you today were to walk up to you and say that, do you think you'd believe it?
Yeah. I do, and I'd let them have the shift.
Yeah, fuck, take it.
Please do.
Yeah, I get the tips though.
I do, because I also like I know who I am too, right? Like, and I think anybody that's working that hard, you know, it's coming from somewhere. So I do, and I also know that when I was working that hard, people were helping me. It wasn't just me, right? Like the guys at the bar were throwing money at me because they knew. So I was making more money than I typically would have because they knew what was happening in my life. Like people want to help you. So if you can be open to taking it and asking for it, like you're not in it alone. And that's, I think that's a lesson. But again, a lesson always for me is women, know your finances. Okay. Don't give your money away. Keep it in your bank account. Yeah.
Now at this stage, right? Like you got a sick purple suit on,
right?
Like your hair is doing what it needs to. You know what I mean? You got these awesome pins. You got all this ice. You know, looking fancy.
We're all coming together for Lori.
Now, what types of things is Lori like? What types of mountains are you climbing these days? I'm
not climbing the mountain anymore. Right now, I'm trying to just coast a little bit. Like we've spent a lot of time, this whole organization really going hard, and now we need to make sure the foundation is strong.
Yeah.
And so make sure we have the right processes in place to make sure that we can continue. Always being efficient, like we're never going to be bureaucratic because that's nonsense, but just making sure that we can all take a breath.
Yeah.
Like you need to rest as well as perform all the time.
So how can we help? And when I say we, I mean the audience, the people on LinkedIn that are watching, the people on Instagram, the people on whatever platform they're listening to. You know, how can we help Lori and Second Harvest?
The best way is, okay, if you know anybody, or even if you're eating out and there's anywhere food, tell them to go on the food rescue app, because there's always somebody that's going to want their surplus food, and there's always surplus food. And a restaurant and food service and manufacturing, there's always surplus food. So connecting people to that app would really help everybody out, which is great. And of course, I'm a charity, so I'm always going to ask for money.
Yeah. Hey, and before we do run out of here, I'm curious, if you were to start a charity all over again, where would you what would you start to get your first partners, to get your first dollar in the door? You know, if you're starting a charity, because you're not the only charity that's like, shoot, we need money. Right?
No,
There's other people
for sure. And I think, okay, so, and I get asked this a lot from people that are starting their own charities.
Yeah.
Make sure you need one, quite frankly. I mean, there's 61,000 charities that are supporting people with food already. So what I've said, and this happens a lot, like globally, like what's actually happening in your community already? Are you sure you need to start a charity, or do you need to be working with an existing place, or, like, or supporting an existing place? So first, understand the landscape. I'm surprised how many people just don't ask the questions. Ask the questions, what's happening in my community already, and how can I support it? And then if really legitimately it doesn't exist, you're going to be fine. Because I think one of the things that was really important for Second Harvest, and continues to be, is carving out our niche, right? Like, don't be part of the noise. What makes you unique? And what makes us unique is we are an environmental organization that supports people with food. We are unique, and we stay in our lane, right? Like, don't try to boil the ocean. You can't fix every problem. So pick one and go forward and do the best you can. And if you're in a really unique space, the money will come.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, Lori. We appreciate you. Now, is there any question that we should have asked that we might not have?
You did a great job. This was fun.
Don't pump my tires, okay?
This is great.
Thanks so much. We appreciate you. And we'll see you on the next episode. Peace. And thank you so much for tuning in to yet another episode of 100 Ways to Make 100K, the show where we're on the hunt to find 100 different ways to make 100 grand a month. Now, this episode was a little bit of a side quest, but if you're donating over 100,000 pounds of food in a month, I think that's something remarkable. So thanks so much for tuning in to another episode. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and we'll see you on the next episode. Peace.